At 0415 hours, 200 nautical miles off the coast of La Guaira, something almost impossible to believe took place. The AIS signal from the cargo ship Sparta 4 suddenly vanished. This 500-foot vessel, carrying a long-range missile system and equipment valued at nearly $1 billion, had disappeared right under the watch of U.S. Southern Command. Russia was taking a dangerous gamble. By switching off its AIS transponder, the ship tried to blend in with hundreds of fishing vessels, hoping to slip quietly through the U.S. Navy's surveillance network and reach a Venezuelan port unnoticed. The response from the Pentagon was immediate. An interception order was issued. U.S. commanders knew exactly what was at stake. If this vessel reached the dock, Venezuela's coastline could soon be reinforced with missile complexes capable of changing the balance of power across the entire Caribbean Sea. As the USS Arleigh Burke increased speed and moved toward Venezuelan waters, Caracas made its own move. Two Su-30 Mk2 squadrons took off from El Libertador Air Base, carrying the K-31 Krypton, a supersonic anti-ship missile capable of flying faster than Mach 3. But then, something strange happened. The moment the aircraft headed out toward the sea, the radar signatures of the entire Su-30 formation suddenly vanished from the screens of the U.S. fleet. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere became tense. American officers stared at their displays, watching the radar picture distort around the Cordillera de la Costa mountain range. Had the aircraft turned back, or had they dropped into an area where the fleet's radar could no longer reach them? The answer came seconds later, in a way no one expected. From behind peaks rising nearly 2,000 meters high, the Su-30s suddenly climbed in a sharp vertical pop-up maneuver. For just 10 seconds, their N-01 radar systems came online at full power, locking onto the USS Arleigh Burke. Then, before the American air defense system could properly react, the jets dove back into the valleys and disappeared again. It was a perfectly timed ambush. The Venezuelan pilots had used the massive mountain range like a natural shield, hiding behind the terrain and appearing only long enough to expose the American ship. This placed the captain of the Arleigh Burke in a nearly impossible position. If he activated the ship's high-power radar to search for the hidden aircraft, those emissions would make the destroyer stand out like a bright beacon, guiding the KH-31 missiles straight toward it. But if he kept the ship radar silent, he would lose sight of the Sparta 4, which was still moving somewhere in the shadows. It was a true dilemma. If you think Venezuela's mountain hiding tactic was risky but extremely clever, type 1 in the comments section. Now let's see how the U.S. tried to solve this problem. The American captain chose a careful countermeasure. He ordered MCON, or emissions control, to be activated. All active radar systems were shut down, and the ship went completely silent. Then he called for help from high above the battlefield, far beyond the reach of the Venezuelan mountains. The MQ-4C Triton reconnaissance drone. Flying at more than 50,000 feet, the Triton became the eyes of the fleet below. From that altitude, the mountains could no longer block its view or disrupt its signal. The data collected by the Triton was sent through an encrypted link directly to the command screens aboard the USS Arleigh Burke. Its mission was clear: keep tracking the Sparta 4 and make sure the cargo ship could not use the fleet's radar silence as a chance to escape. But the Su-30s were not the only obstacle. To protect the arrival of the Sparta 4, the Venezuelan military also positioned S-300VM Ante, 2,500 air defense systems along the coast, using a shoot-and-move tactic to avoid being tracked for too long. The principle was simple. The S-300 radar vehicles kept moving from one position to another, activating their radar systems only for a brief moment to lock onto the USP-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft. Then, just as quickly, they shut everything down and disappeared into the forest. This created serious pressure on the P-8, forcing it to pull back and stay away from the coastline, unable to get close enough to threaten the Sparta 4. The P-8 crew knew they were being tracked, but the Venezuelan units were shutting down and relocating so quickly that the electronic warfare officers did not have enough time to pinpoint an exact location for counter-radar missiles. Venezuela believed this mobile, guerrilla-style tactic was nearly impossible to beat, but they were wrong. From an aircraft carrier operating off the coast of Puerto Rico, a squadron of EA-18G Growlers from the VAQ-130 Electronic Warfare Squadron was urgently sent into the area. Flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet, the Growlers released 4 mold decoys. Using signature augmentation technology, these small unmanned decoys created a radar image that looked exactly like a formation of 4 FA-18 Super Hornet fighters moving in for an operation. The deception worked perfectly. The S-300 crews believed the U.S. was beginning a preemptive aerial move. With almost no time to stay hidden, their survival instincts pushed them to activate the 9S-32 grill pan radar at full power, keeping it online continuously to track the incoming targets. And that was the mistake that changed everything. The continuous radar transmission gave the P-8 Poseidon, flying along the outer edge of the area, enough time to capture the full electronic fingerprint and precise GPS coordinates of each launcher. Venezuela's coastal air defense network was now marked on the digital map and tactically neutralized. The coastal threat had been handled. Now the U.S. could return its focus to the main target, the Sparta 4. Back on the surface, the race was entering its decisive stage. The Sparta 4 had reached the 14 nautical mile mark. It was only 2 nautical miles away from the line that mattered most, equal to roughly 10 minutes of sailing. Soon it would cross the 12 nautical mile boundary and enter Venezuelan territorial waters. Once it crossed that line, international law would protect it. At that point, the U.S. would lose its ability to act directly. So why was the U.S. so concerned about this ship? The answer was hidden among the containers stacked across its deck. U.S. intelligence suspected that among the hundreds of ordinary civilian containers were Club K missile systems, one of the most unpredictable tools in asymmetric warfare. From the outside, a Club K system looks exactly like a standard 40-foot shipping container. It can be hidden among trucks, trains, cargo yards, or even fishing vessels. But inside, it carries Calibre cruise missiles with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers. If the Club K system reached port, it could be placed in an ordinary parking lot in Caracas and still have the range to threaten the Panama Canal or U.S. bases in Florida. It had to be stopped before reaching the shore. But there was one major problem. The Arleigh Burke was a warship, and if a warship directly intercepted a civilian commercial vessel, it could be viewed as a military escalation. So the destroyer stayed beyond the horizon, keeping its SM-6 missiles ready while avoiding a direct confrontation. Instead, the U.S. sent the USCG James WMSL-754 from the United States Coast Guard to the front line. The reason given was simple: a maritime safety inspection and an anti-smuggling operation. This made the situation a law enforcement action, not a direct military move. From a legal and strategic point of view, it was a careful and calculated decision. The Coast Guard ship's loudspeaker came alive on the international frequency, ordering the Sparta 4 to reduce speed so inspectors could come aboard and check for possible safety violations related to hazardous cargo procedures. But the Russian captain ignored the instruction. The Sparta 4 kept moving forward and pushed its speed up to the maximum of 18 knots. The crew was making a calculated bet. No matter how tense the moment became, the U.S. Coast Guard would not risk direct force against a civilian vessel. Then the situation escalated sharply. Venezuela rejected the inspection completely. Out of the fog, 2 Italian-built Lupo-class escort ships from the Venezuelan Navy appeared. Their 127mm naval guns turned directly toward the U.S. Coast Guard vessel. They were older ships, but they still carried serious firepower. Each Lupo-class escort was fitted with an Otto Melara 127mm naval gun, far more powerful than the weapons mounted on the Coast Guard cutter. The Venezuelan ships crossed the bow, aimed their guns, and forced the USCG James to make a sharp turn to avoid a collision. The tension on the water was now extreme. The Coast Guard ship was outmatched in firepower. Meanwhile, the Russian captain continued to accelerate, ignoring every warning as the Sparta 4 moved closer and closer to the safety of territorial waters. It looked as if the U.S. was about to lose the entire standoff. The opposing side seemed confident, almost certain that Washington had run out of options. But that confidence disappeared the moment a chilling sound cut through the water, passed through the thick steel hulls, and echoed into the command rooms. It was the sharp ping of active sonar at extremely close range. The signal came from the port side of the Venezuelan formation, about 800 meters away. Then the calm surface of the sea suddenly began to churn like a giant boiling pot. A column of white water burst upward. From the depths, a massive black shape rose through the ocean, tearing its way to the surface. It was the USS Washington, SSN 787, a Virginia Block III nuclear-powered submarine. A 115-meter-long vessel powered by an S-9G nuclear reactor had surfaced right beside the aging Venezuelan ships. The message from the American submarine captain was unmistakable. "We have been directly beneath your hulls for the past 4 hours. The choice is yours. Do you continue this standoff, or do you test whether your hulls can survive what we carry below the surface?" The arrival of the Virginia-class submarine changed everything. Suddenly, Venezuela's 2 Lupo-class escorts looked small, exposed, and vulnerable. They realized they had been caught in a complete tactical squeeze. Drones were above them, a Coast Guard cutter was in front of them, destroyers were waiting beyond the horizon, and a nuclear-powered submarine had been silently positioned beneath them the entire time. The 2 Venezuelan escort ships had nowhere useful to move. Their outdated 1980s sonar systems had never detected the submarine. They had no idea they were being tracked from below. In a real engagement, they would have been removed from the fight long before they understood what had happened. At that moment, the confidence on the Venezuelan side began to crack. But high above the coast, one Venezuelan Su-30 pilot still refused to back down. Frustration pushed him into a dangerous decision. As tensions reached their highest point, the Su-30 squadron leader chose to perform a reckless pop-up maneuver. From behind the mountains, his aircraft climbed sharply, activated its targeting radar, and placed a hard lock directly on the USS Arleigh Burke. The pilot was gambling that the U.S. would not respond in international airspace. The moment the American ship detected the lock signal, the Arleigh Burke brought its AN/SPY-1 radar online at full power, focusing its energy directly toward the lead Su-30 and signaling that its SM-6 air defense system was ready. At the same time, the EEA-18G Growler aircraft launched an electronic warfare response using the ALQ-99 jamming pod. The Su-30's electronic systems immediately began to struggle. The HUD flickered. The radar went blind. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's headphones were flooded with harsh static from the jamming signal. Faced with an overwhelming wall of technology, his survival instincts took over. The Venezuelan pilot broke the target lock, pulled into a sharp turn, and dropped deep into the valley to escape. The aerial threat had been pushed back. Now, only one piece remained on the chessboard, the Sparta 4. The U.S. delivered its final move from an altitude of 50,000 feet. The MQ-4C Triton drone identified container 894, where the Club K system was believed to be hidden, and marked it with a laser designator. High-resolution thermal imagery was then transmitted on the international emergency frequency, followed by a firm warning. Sparta 4, we have detected unstable military-grade cargo inside container 894. If you continue for another nautical mile, we will be forced to render it safe on site in order to protect maritime traffic. It was a checkmate move. Still, the Russian captain tried to save the situation. He requested permission to divert to the port of Havana, Cuba, claiming the ship needed technical repairs. But his intention was obvious. He wanted to reach a friendly port, wait for the pressure to fade, and later find another way to move the cargo toward Venezuela. But the U.S. Navy was already one step ahead. As soon as the Russian vessel requested entry into Cuba, the U.S. State Department sent an urgent diplomatic message to Havana. Any country that accepts this ship and its restricted military cargo will be viewed as directly escalating the crisis and may face immediate maritime restrictions. The Cuban government had no interest in taking risks for cargo that did not belong to them. Havana refused to allow the Sparta 4 to dock. The final escape route was closed. At that point, the destroyer USS Arleigh Burke issued the last ultimatum. Sparta 4, you are denied entry to any port in the region. Your only option is to turn back toward the Atlantic. We will escort you out of the exclusive economic zone. The Russian captain finally understood the situation. There was no way forward. The billion-dollar ship was forced to turn around and begin the long journey back across the Atlantic toward Russia. The cost of fuel, logistics, time, and most importantly, prestige, had all been lost at sea. The Caribbean incident ended without a single shot fired, but its impact was greater than a battle. By forcing the Russian ship to return home, the U.S. did more than stop one shipment. It sent a message for the future. Uncle Sam's backyard is not a place where anyone can move freely without consequences. The Club K and S-300 VM systems would now sit unused in warehouses at the port of Novorossiysk, Russia, instead of becoming a strategic problem in South America. Venezuela learned a costly lesson about isolation, and the world saw once again that real power is not always about pulling the trigger. Sometimes real power is the ability to control the entire game before the first move is even made. What do you think about this bold move? Leave your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Navy Vector to stay updated on the next high-stakes military chess match.